Evening all, welcome to a very, very snowy North Sea coast. Snowy and chilly, in fact. And welcome to episode 3 of our 2013 blog. Now, what I don't want you to think is that I spend pretty much every waking minute of my life in cinema. Because obviously this will now be my third review in 4 days. These are the 3 films that I've watched so far in the 2 weeks so far in 2013. So tonight's review is going to be of The Hunt, which is the new film from Thomas Vinterberg. Now, I'll admit I've not seen any other pieces of what Vinterberg's done, but I do know he was working very closely for a long while with Lars von Trier, who I'm a big fan of Lars. Maybe not Lars personality-wise, but I enjoy his films. Melancholia last year was very, very good, and a few years ago, Antichrist it's still one of those films that haunts me to this day. It's not a nice film, but I mean, Willem Dafoe's performance in that is superb. The soundtrack is brilliant. So, big fan of Von Trier. He worked with Vinterberg. Vinterberg has made The Hunt, which is the new film starring Mads Mikkelsen, or I believe actually Mads Mikkelsen, I think is how it should be said. But anyway, now 2012 seems to have been a pretty good year for Mikkelsen. He was in A Royal Affair, which has been getting huge praise everywhere. I think it even made it as I think it was Mark Kermode's Film of the Year for 2012, along with Barbarian Sound Studio. The problem I've got, obviously, is I didn't actually manage to catch A Royal Affair, so I can't really comment on that, but it is in the running as well for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. I mean, this is sort of one of my gripes against the Academy, is that the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar, for some reason, has to go every year to a country, and each country submits one film, and the Academy then chooses from those films the best 5 or 6. Now, the problem with that is that you get years like this in which you've got 2 films from Denmark, A Royal Affair and The Hunt, both of which have been garnering a lot of praise. And it does mean that you unfortunately can't honour both of them at the major film award ceremony, because you're only allowed one per country, which seems a bit unfair to me, since year upon year you'll get the best film category is just completely filled with American films. I mean, you wouldn't get, say, at the BAFTAs, we have the best British film, but we wouldn't have our best film category completely full of British films. I mean, that's what sort of angers me of what the Academy does, is sort of forcing foreign films, and really good foreign films, into a category by themselves and limiting it to one film per country. But enough of the gripe against the Academy. What we have in The Hunt is, it's a film, it's set, as I say, in Denmark, and it stars Mads Mikkelsen as, well, he was a school teacher. Because of the recession in Denmark, he's lost his job, and he's now working as an assistant in a nursery. And the film sort of opens up in this very, very close-knit community, and you sort of see montages of all these men of the village sort of bonding together and hunting together and leaping naked into frozen lakes and doing things that sort of happen in Denmark. And you sort of get the idea of what this kind of community is that it's a very, very secluded community. They're very, very tight-knit. Everyone knows who everybody else is. And what happens is you see Mads Mikkelsen go into the supermarket with his dog, and outside the supermarket he sees a young girl from his class called Clara. and he offers to walk Clara home, which he does, and they walk home with her and the dog, and they get to Clara's house, and he comes in, and it's explained that Mads Mikkelsen and the girl's father are very good friends, and they're both part of the same hunting group and everything else. As the film progresses, you see Clara becoming more and more attached to Mads Mikkelsen, and you can tell that she's getting a bit of a crush on her teacher. And at one point, you see Mads playing with all the kids in the nursery. He gets sort of bowled over by them, and Clara dashes in, and she kisses him. Now, after this incident, Mads Mikkelsen goes to Clara and sort of says to her, that's not really appropriate, and everything else, and says, you should be kissing boys if you have to, your own age. And what follows after this is that obviously this quite upsets Clara, and you get a scenario in which the head of the nursery notices that there's something wrong with her, and through a slightly convoluted set of events, they become convinced that the reason why the child is so upset is because she's been abused by her teacher. And what they do is they bring in a sort of outside psychologist who, as is the way these days with Danish films and Danish TV series, it's played by, I'm not sure who the actor is, but he was in The Killing, season 1. He's in Borgen at the moment as well, so obviously they're very, very short of actors in Denmark. So he comes in, and they have this sort of interview with Clara, in which they ask her a series of leading questions to try and get towards the answer that they want, which is that Mads Mikkelsen has in some way behaved inappropriately and abused this girl. And they become convinced of that, and eventually Clara caves, and she says, yes, he's done all this stuff to me. And they invite all the parents to the school, and basically tell them there's been an incident, and that one of the children has been abused, and what signs they should be looking out for in their own children, in case this has got any more widespread than just Clara. So what happens is the next day, as normal, Mads Mikkelsen comes to work and is basically told to go away and to take some enforced leave while they investigate this claim that a child, who isn't named, has put in a complaint saying that he's abused them. Now, it doesn't take long for him to work out that it's Clara. So he goes to his friend's house and says, I haven't done anything, this is your daughter making it up. And his best friend, you can see he's very, very torn, and he says, I'm sorry, but my daughter doesn't lie. Whatever's happened, you must have done something. And what sort of follows after this is the turning of the whole community against this man who's been accused of such a terrible crime. But we know that he hasn't done anything, and that it's just the child's imagination. And gradually, the town turns more and more against him, they get more and more violent. It's being quite widely reported that, his dog is killed by them, they shoot it. There's a very, very touching scene when he's trying to bury the dog in the rain, and it's filling up the grave, and the only people who have stuck by him through this whole thing are his son and his son's godfather. Now, playing alongside this story with Clara, there's a second story thread about Mads Mikkelsen's son, who he's estranged from his wife, and the son is shared equally between the two homes. And the mother suggests she wants to have more of the child, and ultimately something happens with the mother to make the son decide that he instead wants to live full-time with Mads Mikkelsen. Now, unfortunately, somebody tells his wife, well, ex-wife, about the incident with Clara. And so, perhaps understandably, his ex-wife says, no, the son cannot go to live with you until this is all sorted out. And the son eventually, he runs away, but when his father gets arrested for the abuse of Clara, then sort of the son has to go and stay, first of all, with his godfather, and then back with his mother again. So, that you've got the two storylines running side by side about, how his career has been ruined by this and how his relationship with his son is on the line because of this. There's also a third storyline in which he's got one of the helpers at the nursery has taken a bit of a shine to him, and they have a relationship, and eventually he also drives her away because of the stress that this thing's putting under. Because at one point she sees him with Clara talking to her, and I think she asks quite fairly, has there been absolutely nothing going on between the two of you? To which he, perhaps because of the stress that he's under, completely overreacts and literally throws her out, and that's the end of the relationship. So you sort of see, as the film goes on, this community turning more and more against this pilloried individual. At one point he's physically thrown out of the supermarket and gets beaten. I mean, you're seeing pictures in the previews of the film, basically, of Mads Mikkelsen with his face all beaten up and things, because that's what happens to him. Now, ultimately, the film, I'm not sure, it's a good premise, but it strikes me as one of those films that it thinks it's a lot cleverer than it is. Whether it thinks that it's got this great premise, the fact that it put me in mind of the film Doubt, which sort of the same thing happens, in which someone's accused of a terrible, terrible crime, but the difference between Doubt and this is that in Doubt we aren't certain whether or not he did it. In this, there's no uncertainty. We know for a fact that the child made it up. But the problem is that it's got that intelligent idea behind it, but it never really follows through. And the way in which a film like this would have to work is by making you believe this could genuinely happen to you. This is how it has to happen. Making you realise that he's just an ordinary guy. He's done nothing wrong, and yet this has happened to him. It could happen to you as well. And you never feel that way, because an awful lot of the plot strands, they're either too simplistic or too convoluted. I mean, I've never worked, for example, in any kind of environment with children, but I'm fairly certain that you wouldn't process an accusation like this in that way. It wouldn't simply be just taking the child's word for it. You wouldn't, for example, not get the police involved straight away. You wouldn't go telling all the parents that one of the children has been abused when you haven't got any evidence. You wouldn't, for example, have the teacher and the psychologist in the room with the child asking such obviously leading questions without the police there. And these are the problems we've got with it, in that the plot just doesn't seem believable. It doesn't seem that you get to this stage with no one going, wait a minute, no, that wouldn't happen. And it leads to a sort of sense of detachment from the whole process, in that you never really believe this could happen. Which, for a film like this, that's quite important. So, we've got that as a problem. There's also a problem with the ending. Now, I know a lot of reviews have given away what happens in the final scene. I'm not going to do that. Obviously, for the film to work, you know that in the end, the truth has to come out. He has to be rankled with me was that, okay, ultimately everyone sees the truth, and it's all blown over. Now, whether it's the nature of the community that they're in, or what, I didn't believe why he's... I mean, I understand why he's been accepted back in the community. What I don't understand is why is he taken back then? And after all they've done to him, all it's taken is for them to say, oh, yeah, sorry about that, we were wrong. And he's suddenly going, that's fine, of course. Let's go back to how things used to be. And it just doesn't ring true. In the same way, after the accusation, Clara is sitting on her mother's knee and says, you know, he didn't do it. He didn't do anything to me. I made it up. And the mother just says, no. You must have repressed that. Now, obviously I'm not a parent, but from my point of view, if your child is saying to you, no, I made this up, your first instinct should not be to just go, oh, no, you're clearly repressing it. It would be to sort of say, are you sure what did happen? Let's talk about it. It wouldn't be to say, no, just don't do that. And it's these little things that don't ring true throughout the whole film. And we're sort of... I went into the film, I really wanted to like it, because it was a premise that I thought was really interesting, was that from the outset, you're going to have a guy being accused of something that you know he hasn't done. It's an entire cinema basically ganging up against sort of a 5-year-old girl. I thought it was a really interesting idea. But, as I say, unless you can believe that you could be in that position, it doesn't really work. And ultimately, what you've got is a good idea, and you've got a great performance from Mads Mikkelsen in the main role. He's really good. He is believable as a guy whose world has been torn apart. But the storyline just doesn't mesh. You don't believe it. Because it's... Whether it's the nature of the community that they're trying to portray, in that this is not a community that we can understand, which is fair enough, but if it's not a community we can understand, how can we relate to them? This is what I don't really get about the film and why it's doing what it's doing. So ultimately, it's a film that's it's worth seeing for the idea it portrays. It's certainly not a waste of 2 hours of your time, but just ultimately, it left me feeling a bit underwhelmed that I wanted so much more. I wanted a 21st century Lolita. I wanted to have a book a film that genuinely, in the way Lolita did, it challenges your views of what you think is reality, what you think is accepted. Because obviously your first instinct is always to trust the child. And yet, the child is lying. In the same way, in Lolita, your preconception is always to think, oh, it's obviously that guy is a pervert, and yet ultimately you find out that no, he's not. It's realistically the one that behaves worse is Lolita, not Humbert. In this, it's the one that behaves badly as Clara, and yet you're just too distant. It just seems too unrealistic to be able to work. And I don't know, I mean, I guess I wanted more than I got. It's not a bad film by any means. It was just the build-up, the hype, the idea of the film. Ultimately, I felt a bit let down by it. But, you know, if you've got a few spare hours and you fancy it, by all means go and see it. You'll probably find it an enjoyable way of spending 2 hours. But in terms of the great films of 2013, I don't think this one is going to really struggle anything like to get on that list. So, sorry. Good night.